Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell a friend and give it a mention on your favorite social media platforms. Also, please go to the iTunes store, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It might just inspire Apple to promote us a little. You can support the Virtual Memories Show and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSpod and set up your level of support. You'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. That chest cold I griped about last week took another week to get past, but I think I'm in good health now. I had a great run this morning, didn't cough up a lung at any point, even managed to get over some of my internal psych out issues to keep myself from quitting. And that's more of what I was worried about with a long layoff from running, that I'd get out of the mental practice, not the physical. I also managed 3 conference calls as a lead-in to this week's 2-day Capitol Hill lobbying visit, so I think I'm getting the work, life, podcast, etc. balance back in order. But good health is a blessing. I'm pretty aware of how lucky I have it. I mean, I'm 48, and I haven't suffered any major health issues outside of a knee blowout back when I was in college. I get up in the morning without creaking or groaning, unless I'm trying to make a point. So really, 3 weeks of chest cold incapacity kind of brought that point home to me. That is, without health, you got bupkis. Which brings me to this week's guest, Eva Hagberg Fisher. Eva's the author of the brand new book, How to Be Loved, a memoir of life-saving friendship, from Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. It's an illness and recovery memoir, if that's a genre, but it's a lot more than that. The book starts after Eva has been in recovery for a while for her chemical addictions. And around age 30, after she's moved out to Berkeley and started up her life again, she proceeds to have a series of health episodes that begins with a potential brain tumor and gets more harrowing from there. I don't want to tell you about the rest of them in the interest of spoiler alerts. She does live through the end of it. But suffice to say, they get pretty rough. And in the midst of all that, Eva really comes to treasure the friendship of a terminal cancer patient almost twice her age, whom she met in recovery. And the book is sort of centered on her acceptance of that friendship and that love, and why it's very difficult for Eva to do that, even when this woman is slipping away. So the book, it's this exploration of illness and dependence and friendship, but it's written by someone who's way too smart and self-driven to trust anyone, which makes it a really interesting dynamic. In addition to the horrifying nitty-gritty of her brain surgery in particular, and the recovery from that, Eva delves into the sort of performative aspects of living in the socially networked world, and the relation of virtual friends to real-life ones, like the ones who are actually on hand to drive you to appointments and set you up with ice cream or soup or whatever when you're walloped. Now, I don't mean to sound dismissive. I'm just on my own kick about the real and the virtual when it comes to relationships, as longtime listeners are well aware. Eva's only about 10 years younger than me. Might be Eva. I should have asked her at the time. Only about 10 years younger than me. So the differences in our relationships to the virtual are probably more particular than generational. Still, it's a fascinating book for its exploration of the varieties of friendship. And also, her medical situation reaches Job levels of what's next, and that provides a sort of whodunit aspect to the book, like a weird episode of House. So the combo of all that made How to Be Loved pretty engaging and entertaining for me. Entertaining in as much as I know she survives at the end and all these illnesses eventually sort of get under control. But anyway, on top of all that, throughout the book, she sort of alludes to the levels of deception and secrecy that riddle her addiction days and her life beyond that. So overall, I kind of figured we were going to have a fun conversation with all sorts of weird feints and blurted secrets that may or may not be true. There is plenty of that. Plus, I talked too much about Facebook and New Vigil over the course of the conversation. And speaking of caveats, the room we recorded in was a little echoey, and there's also an air pressure thing with a door that caused a sort of hum every so often. Tried getting rid of that part, but it's too tough to isolate and left the overall sound kind of weird. Sorry. And here's Eva's bio. Eva Hagberg Fisher's writing has appeared in the New York Times, Tin House, Wallpaper, Wired, and Dwell, among other places. She holds degrees in architecture from UC Berkeley and Princeton, and a PhD in visual and narrative culture from UC Berkeley. Her new book is How to Be Loved, a memoir of life-saving friendship. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Eva Hagberg Fisher. So how are you feeling? Because I'm afraid of like sneezing or anything.
Oh, right, in case I get sick. I feel great. Honestly, I feel amazing. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I said, "Yeah, I think I'm just like not sick anymore. You know, this is great. I have no symptoms. I'm symptom free." And she said, "I'm so happy to hear that. This too shall pass." And it was a helpful reminder that whenever I feel good, I think, thank God the suffering is over. And then whenever I feel bad, I think, why did I fly too close to the sun? Why did I do this to myself? I will never feel good again. That was my moment, and I missed it. So,
did you have a jinx fear with the memoir that you were cursing yourself?
Oh yeah. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
My original ending was not an ending. I didn't want to give a diagnosis. I didn't want to have any sort of cathartic closure.
We're just gonna be in the tent in Arizona.
Yeah, no. And basically, my original draft, the last scene was me walking around a rock talking to a bird, and my editor, who is brilliant, said, this is not an ending. We need to have an ending. We need closure. And I had been really against closure as both a narrative idea and as a life idea. And one of the things that I had to get comfortable with, which I did, was that a book can have an ending even if my life is not having a particular ending, and I can give my readers a sense of, we got an answer and it worked and the treatment worked, and that was great. But I do also try and end on a little bit of a note of uncertainty, I think, to sort of give myself an experiential buffer, in case I get really sick again. And actually, I had to get surgery a month ago, and it felt really...
Geez, what this time?
Thank you. Endometriosis. It's like just another, not recommended. Don't get it. But I felt the sort of... But I felt the indignity of that experience. I mean, I really was like, I'm done. I don't do this anymore. I don't go to the doctor anymore. I don't go to the hospital anymore. Why am I doing... this is a clerical error. And I felt really sort of embarrassed and mortified, and I didn't want to ask for help anymore. And my editor actually said, I talked to my editor because, we're strategizing everything. And I said, listen, I have to get a surgery. Should I get it now or in January? She said, get it now. It was December. And I said, she said, how are you feeling about it? And I said, I don't want to do it. And I'm embarrassed and it's stupid and I don't want to tell anybody. And she said, I have a book I could recommend to you, which you wrote, so maybe go read your own book again, which I didn't, but I remembered how much I had learned at one point, so. Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, was it at what point did you feel, I guess, that it warranted enough that it was closed enough to warrant the telling? Not the final part, but at what point in your life did you feel like, okay, this is actually could comprise a book of what I've gone through?
I don't think that I ever actually, that's a great question. I don't think that I ever felt that way. I mean, I pitched the proposal from my tent in Arizona, where I thought I would live forever. Yeah. So, I met my agent and I said, well, too bad we'll never meet in person because I live in a tent in Arizona permanently. And then sort of bizarre accidents of medicine actually brought me back to the Bay Area. But I just had a drive to try and sell a proposal, and then I had to drive to fulfill my contractual obligations once I had sold the proposal. And my life, I was sort of 6 months to a year behind in the writing. But the last act, I was very, very close to having lived in the desert. So the last part is about being in the desert.
Yeah, it's like an asymptote in general. Like everything, you're starting out more and more distant and catching up to. Once I started figuring out the dates in general, not that I was a detective or anything.
Yeah.
It's like you could not have written this that long ago, or couldn't have experienced this that much.
Right. So I remember I had to get 2 more surgeries. So I was working on a proposal and I had to get 2 more surgeries really, really close together. And one of them, my doctors were like, listen, you very probably have ovarian cancer. And so I was working on a proposal for a book that I was going to write while at the same time considering a future in which I was going to have, really intense treatment that was probably going to make me not able to write a book. And I just needed a lot of magical thinking to get through that. And then when I didn't have cancer and did sell the book, I didn't know how it was going to end. And actually the reason that the ending didn't work is that I wasn't better yet. And my editor extended my deadline. And in that extension, I got better in a more permanent way. And so I was able to sort of tack on, it is now June or whatever, I'm better. Yeah. But even writing that, God, that just felt like tempting all of the fates. I just thought, why am I saying this is hubris? Why am I saying this?
I felt bad when I woke up with a little bit of a cold this morning, frankly, and that was Jesus, I'm going to lead to her next book with this. So this is going to be awful.
Right. I did a podcast and got a cold. How are you feeling? How does it feel to have a cold as a
lot better than brain tumor, heart condition, and I would say mold allergy, the thing we don't want to give away for a spoiler as to what it all turns into. Yeah. Although I will have to point out that my wife also once saw a doctor who asked out of the blue, is there a history of sudden death in your family? Which she thought was a little impertinent of a doctor to ask, and I came across it in your book. I'll say, oh, thank God, there's at least one other person who's been hit with that question. That's a little off-putting.
Does she have a history of sudden death in her family?
There is a history of people abusing their bodies with food and such, to the point at which the death does happen suddenly, but there's usually a number of signs leading up to it. But let me ask you mentioned magical thinking. Memoir templates, memoir examples you were working from, magical thinking being a reminder of Didion, of course.
Right.
So were there examples you had in mind or things you were trying to avoid based on memoir?
I didn't read any memoirs on purpose while I was doing the proposal or the book. I read a lot of memoirs while I was sick. And I was looking for maps, and there's a little paragraph where I mentioned some of them, so I'll mention them here. Barbara Ehrenreich's Bright-Sided, which is half memoir, half reporting. I thought that was just a perfect articulation of an argument that I wanted to make and that I think I made from a very different perspective, which is that, positive thinking and moving forward and getting through it is actually not always the answer for everyone. I love Joshua Cody's book, Sick. SIC. That I think formally was really influential for me just in the sort of circular lyricism. I think his book is it's not this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and, oh wow, here we are now. Sarah Manguso's Two Types of Decay. That book actually truly saved my life because I was in my tent, utterly hopeless, believing that 1, I was allergic to mold, and 2, mold was literally everywhere, so I had no option. And I remember reading Two Types of Decay, and she talks about having this CIDP, I think chronic idiopathic polymyelitis something neuropathy. But there was some, I don't know if she actually wrote this or if I read this into the text, but there's some moment where she's saying that something's wrong and doctors are saying, no, it's not possible that you feel this numbness. And I thought, maybe everything has some sort of answer. I mean, maybe there's a diagnosis for me that isn't so sort of outside of the bounds of accepted Western medicine as to be, that there is mold everywhere and I am having this like intense neurological reaction that doesn't actually line up with what I've heard about allergy. And so her book in a way, formally and literarily was extraordinarily meaningful to me, but also just very practically. I just thought, I'm just going to try something different. And that's why I called my doctor. And then I got this answer.
Right. From Attention, Arizona, which he warned you about not ending
up with. I know. I was mortified. But I love reading memoir, and I think a lot about genre. And in my PhD program, my qualifying exams included English, and I was asked to define the distinction between autobiography and memoir. And what I really wanted to do was make a series of arguments, and I happened to use the events that happened in my own life in order to illuminate those series of arguments. I think I'm sort of just wired to filter my intellectual ideas through myself. But I see myself from a lot of distance. So I think in my academic work, I have an archive. I just finished my dissertation. I have an archive. I know where the archive is. I know what it contains. I know the plot points. And I use it very dispassionately to make certain arguments. And I felt the same way about my life, where I thought, okay, I want to make these observations. I want people to know the things that my friend Allison told me. And so the vehicle to get to the things Allison told me is going to be to talk about these medical events and being a drug addict and alcoholic and all these things. But all of that was really in service of these ideas. And so I'm trying to be more graceful about it, but people will say like, oh, why did you share your story? Or, thank you for sharing your story. And I'm like, I'm not sharing my story. I'm dispassionately using events in my own life to make a point. And then my therapist often says, how dispassionate is it really? And, are you more intimate with the work than you think you are? And then
you say, who's paying who here?
And then I say, haha, I've tricked you. And then a week later I say, haha, I've tricked myself. So,
So do you define difference between autobiography and memoir?
I do define the difference. Yeah. Oh, are you asking me to define? Yeah.
So extra credit's going to be satire versus parody. That'll be the next question.
Okay, great. So autobiography is a retroactive, often chronological account of events that happen in a life by a person who has some reason to be well known. And, people that write autobiographies are typically presidents, movie stars, Formula One race car drivers, gymnasts, right? Memoir, to my understanding, takes a particular moment or a series of moments, but often with a singular unifying theme in order to explore broader issues that a lot of people ideally face, right? So, I don't know that, I'm trying to think of an autobiography. So Kamala Harris just came out with I think she says it's a memoir, but it sounds like an autobiography to me.
I had this with Moby. It's a memoir, but I'm like, it's really a chronological retelling of your life up until 1998. So to me, it feels more like an autobiography, but Moby, an autobiography, is going to sound pretentious. So I think he decided to go with memoir.
With memoir. Right. So what was he exploring? I haven't read his book. I should.
It's a hoot. We had a good conversation about it, but he's working on volume 2 where he's a horrible, horrible person.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting book in terms of, who he was and what he developed into, what the world around him was and how that music scene changed over a bunch of really critical years in the early 90s.
Right. I'm an old friend of his, so.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we haven't been in touch recently, but I've known him for a decade.
Cool. Yeah, check that one out. It seems to be about a decade ago that he straightened his life out and is no longer so he says. At least in the timing, not as horrible a person. Listen, I've heard horrible stories, some of them from him. So he seems to put those into a certain year range. But.
I mean, do you think that there's a distinction between autobiography and memoir?
Yeah, I've assumed memoir is more self-contained, again, attempting to work thematically, but also I tend to give memoir like the Clive James unreliable memoirs thing, where it's not quite as, it doesn't need to be as strictly factual. Frankly, we have a big hiccup about that in America, but I think memoir should at least give you a little bit of room to say it's memory.
Right.
And we know memory is not reliable.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that opens a really fascinating, to me, question, maybe fascinating to you, which is the difference between accuracy and truth and reliability and memory and honesty. And,
there's a great baseball story about Ricky Henderson that's completely untrue, but so utterly believable and says so much about him that it may as well be true.
Right.
Yeah. It's one of those, well, screw it. Ricky never actually said this, but you know what?
Right. But it's true.
It's Ricky.
Right. So. It might not be factual, but it's true. I mean, because one of the things, so I was pursuing a degree related to history at UC Berkeley. And so Hayden White, the narrative turn, the discursive turn in the early 90s, this is a big thing. Are you familiar with that general? Yeah. So, one of the things that I was looking at from an academic standpoint was White's conceptions of correspondence versus, I'm going to have forgotten his other three ideas of history, but basically, is history accurate? Is history true? Do we make it true by telling the story in a specific way? I feel that my memoir is deeply, deeply true. It is factual to, the best way that I can remember anything, but is it actually possible to write or even tell anything that is inherently any more true than anything else? I mean, you can't do like a one-to-one recording of a life.
Unless you're Borges or Knausgaard or something. So.
Right, which I haven't read either
There's
of
no
them.
need, really.
Thank you.
Yeah, although you're in
Thank
Brooklyn, so I guess you do have to, since you still live here.
Oh, is that all the Brooklyn people have read Knausgaard?
But, you can get away with it by saying, no, I'm not an English major, sort of.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, trying to create a one-to-one, a scale model to the history and reality.
Right.
It's not feasible, not possible.
Right.
So,
and I have a tattoo that says a one-to-one scale model, so I am clearly trying to get in this direction somehow.
Should have included that in the book. That would have been great.
Oh, I know. So many things.
You didn't include, at one point you don't know how to drive, and later on you do. And I'm assuming there's some funny stories about learning to drive that you didn't bother including in the memoir.
Oh.
As an adult, but.
Yeah. Well, my husband started out teaching me to drive and then quickly stopped teaching me how to drive, because I was, not a good student. It was not a good dynamic for us. So a friend of his taught me how to drive, and his, very, very, I can't recognize cars. I honestly, I can't tell the difference between like a Dodge Caliber and a Mustang and a Jeep. I mean, but he had a small car and drove me around and taught me to always scan the horizon and gave me a lot of positive feedback. So yeah, at 32 or something, I got my license, 32, 33. Very proud of myself, very nervous taking the exam, definitely pulled the seat all the way up to the front, gripped the steering wheel, went, exactly the speed limit. And my very nice tester said, "Are you nervous?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I can tell."
Although you spent a life in tests and academia, et cetera. So, I guess that sort of carries over.
I don't fail tests, so I think I knew I wouldn't fail, but
Congratulations. Again, that was just one of those, not discrepancies, but moments where I couldn't drive Allison, so,
Right.
And then later you're zooming all over the desert. So, okay, so maybe a detective, just a little, but,
I know, I like
textual
that.
analysis.
This is good. This is intertextuality. No, this is intratextuality, but I'm sure you have intertextual questions as well.
Was Allison your first friend outside of your age range and generation?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
First friend.
Yeah, real friend. Not acquaintance, but yeah. But she was the first person who was drastically outside your...
Yeah, and I sort of, I speak to that confusion about our age difference and our roles. And there's a scene in the very beginning where I'm at her house and I'm like, wait, are we, what do we do now? Is she gonna mentor me? Am I gonna, I'm definitely not gonna mentor her, but I'm probably smarter and cooler because I'm younger. You know, that's sort of, I see this now with my cousins, my young teen cousins one of them asked me recently, he's like, Eva, do you know what being exclusive means? And I was like, oh, you think I'm 100. Like, you think I'm like a really weird old who doesn't know, which is accurate.
I can't tell the age of anyone younger than me.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, you got a really good facial. Oh no, you're 19. Okay, great. Yeah. So I felt that way with Allison, where I was like, does she get my life? Does she get what's up? Which is why, I used my talking about my sex life with her kind of as a way to indicate my surprise with her basically ability to hang, because at first I was like, are we going to talk about what does a 60-year-old woman talk about? I have no idea. And then, I'm talking to her about this party that I'm going to, and she's just like, oh yeah, you can fuck whoever you want. And I'm like, wait, what? Yeah. Like, this is not what I thought you were like a sweet woman with a dog, and instead she's the raunchiest game in town, so. But we were truly friends, and it was reciprocal, even though the thing she taught me was that reciprocity doesn't matter. So that's sort of an irony that I only just now realized.
See, this show is like therapy for somebody, not me at all. But,
not you. You get nothing out of it?
No. I tell people this is in lieu of my having a social life.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So basically, and the great thing is I just get an hour or so that the other person never gets to realize how shallow I really am. They just go, wow, Gil seems so intelligent, and they don't really find it.
So you do what I used to do.
Yes.
Which is like you get intimate with other people, and other people talk about their lives, and then you feel like you might be intimate with them, but...
No, I never feel intimate with them. I just feel like they get to give, something of themselves. They get to learn something about them, and they get to think they've heard me talk.
So it's a good trick.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing so far. 300 times and nobody's caught on yet. You'll forget by the end of this. So, you were away traveling when Allison died. You don't go into great detail about how that makes you feel exactly, her death in general, but you're not being there? Is that something you regret, or did you feel that the exact moment didn't matter so much as...
So that's
just to change the mood drastically.
No, I love it. I'm always trying to talk about death. I think that I couldn't have been there. I mean, I think that she died when she didn't die when she was supposed to. She died way too early. I often wondered why she died when I was out of town, and I don't think that it was in any way purposeful. I mean, you hear about people who sort of hang on until people leave. I don't actually think that I was that important to her that would have happened. But she took a really long time to die. And I address a little bit of that in the book where, I went to Germany and I was really sure that she was going to die while I was in Germany. And I went to see her and had this very beautiful sort of goodbye. And then I went to Germany and I was like, okay, when I come back, she will be gone. And I came back and she was still alive. And I didn't want to say goodbye again. I just thought this is too awkward. Like we said good, it's sort of like you say goodbye to somebody, then you walk the same direction. I was like, this is too, I can't go back. We already had our moment. And I remember talking to my therapist, and my therapist just said like, listen, I don't think you're ever going to regret going back. So I did go back. And by that point, it was pretty clear that she was really kind of in between this world and the next. I think I just knew that she was going to die while I was gone. I mean, I remember going on that weekend trip and thinking, I think something is probably going to happen. And I found out I have such a visual memory, but I was with my friends and we were packing up to drive back, and I checked my email on my iPhone and I just got an email, subject line Allison, and said she passed away this morning. And I just sat down on the steps and I just cried. And my friends just sat with me, and nobody said anything for 10 minutes. And we all just breathed, and they just let me cry. And I remember just thinking, I'm so, like, this is where I'm supposed to find out, because I was surrounded by people who I had learned to let love me because of the way that Allison had loved me. And if I had been in any other situation, I would have been alone or on the street, or I would have had to call somebody. And instead, people just got to see me in real time, start to absorb this grief. And then they drove me home, and my friend was like, so Eva, we don't know anything about your academic life. Tell us about your dissertation. And it was such a generous act, because she knew that I couldn't talk about my grief, but I could just say, I'm making these historical interventions in architectural history. And I was supposed to take an improv class that night. I'd been taking a couple of improv classes, and I remember just emailing and saying, I think I actually said a family member just died, which felt accurate. And I can't do improv. And then I just had a week where.
But didn't they say that's the best time to do improv?
Oh my God. Sorry. Yeah, I was like, I was pretty torn, because I wanted to, continue living my life or whatever. But being there, to get back to your actual question, I don't feel bad that I wasn't there in the moment. I was there when my grandfather died a year ago, and that was a very, very profound, very beautiful experience. And I was glad that I got to do that, and also that was my first experience being in the room when somebody died, in a way. I feel like everything happened as it was supposed to. So I don't think that my grief would be any less or any more if I had been there. But I also can't imagine
the negation of what you went through, or the alternative to.
Yeah, I'm just imagining if I don't know who was there when she died. I'm sure somebody was, but there were a lot of people who felt about her the way that I did. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think about now is, have I somehow exaggerated our friendship, or did I misunderstand? I have this.
Have you talked to other people in her circle subsequently?
Not really.
Are you afraid to?
Yeah.
That you'll find out that she really wasn't that into you.
Yeah, totally. So this goes back to memoir, right? So I was thinking, there's one friend who's really similar to me, similar age, similar relationship to Allison, and she actually left town after Allison died. She just pieced out, and then she came back, and I'd seen her around, and I just was like, oh God, she's the person who was really close to Allison, and I've written this whole book, and I'm such a drama queen, right? So it's like my core wound is I'm this hysterical drama queen who's making things up for attention. This is my fundamental bad belief about myself. And so I thought, okay, I've just made this whole thing up. And I talked to her and said, I actually wrote a book about Allison, and she was so great about it. She was like, that's so great. My grief was so extreme that I left town for 4 years. And I had thought that she had just handled it better, in some, I always think I've done something wrong and everybody else is doing something better. So I thought, okay, she's handling it better. But I've been sort of, in my nighttime anxieties, I imagine somebody sending me an email saying, I read your book about Allison. I think you should know she didn't like you that much.
She said so much shit about you.
But I also know that she did. And this is sort of and there is a moment where, I have a scene where we're sort of going over my flaws, and she's, agreeing with all of my flaws. And she didn't like me when we met. And that's, the opening line, it was not love at first sight, or second or third or ninth. She really did not, she was not into me. She was just I feel bad for this girl. She has got shit going on. And I think that's part of why our friendship to me was worth writing about, is that it wasn't the sort of magical story of our eyes met across a crowded room and we were fast friends. She didn't like me very much. And I don't know that I was really worth liking, which is hard to swallow. And I think part of why I wanted to write this book is to explore these sort of very micro intimacies that we have in a way, and how uncomfortable I felt. And I was talking to another friend of mine who's a brilliant writer, and I was saying, I hope Allison likes my book. And we know Allison is dead, but I hope she likes my book. My friend just said, well, I don't think that you actually wrote this book to make Allison feel good. You know, you wrote this book because this is the book that you had to write. But, you know, I'm still sort of looking for somebody to confirm or disconfirm my experience. And I think that's going to be my lifelong challenge. I don't know.
Not just about this experience, though.
No, but I mean, with everything. With everything, I think, am I doing this right? Is this how this is? I mean, do you relate? Do you feel like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no,
Okay.
I was explaining to a previous guest. I've spent most of my life with imposter syndrome. It's only been in recent years that I've realized most everybody else is faking it too. And the reason we don't get caught is because they're afraid they'll be next. So, yeah, outside of things that are, you know, specific technical fields like architecture, where you at least cop to the fact that you could not do architecture.
Yep.
There's a whole lot of fields where people are just mucking their way around, but nobody gets called out because that guy could get called out next. So I've learned to get by faking it pretty well.
This all looks very real.
I know, it's all pasteboard.
Yeah, exactly.
I tell you, this is my evening and weekend pursuit, and that sense of we'll get back to your sense of need for validation.
Sure.
But the drama and structuring thing, specific to you, or condemn your entire generation since you're like 10 years younger than me, and it would be helpful for me to do that, or?
You know, that is, no, I don't think it's generational. I think that is very particular to my family. And my family may be symptomatic of a generation, and my family is certainly a stand-in for a particular strain of East Coast WASP culture. When my grandfather died, I mean, he and my grandmother had been together for like 75 years or something, right? I mean, true. I would always ask them the secret to marriage, and my grandmother would say, well, you know, Bill is perfect and I'm perfect. And I mean, there was just no, they have this amazing marriage. He dies. The rest of us are, you know, I'm being the sort of identified weird person in the room. I'm meditating. You know, I realize like the moment of death is approaching. So I am sitting on the floor and I have one palm up, you know, inviting in whatever's going to happen, and one palm down, grounding me. And I'm doing my ujjayi breathing that I learned in yoga. And my mom is doing her thing of being very like concerned and, you know, trying to see if we can fix something. One of my uncles is on his phone checking his like company email, you know, to just like distract himself. And my other uncle is being really present. My grandmother's just sort of sitting there. So my grandfather dies, you know, we all see this. And my mother runs out the room crying, and I go after her. Everybody's crying and red-faced. And my grandmother like puts on her cardigan, puts on her lipstick, calls the undertaker, is very polite, doesn't break, doesn't crack, doesn't cry, nothing, like checks his breathing. Sees that he's not breathing. And 4 hours later, she says, you know, I don't know why people institutionalize grief. I mean, everybody's husband dies. And I just thought, this is why it was so hard for me to feel a feeling. And I'm not saying this critically. I'm not faulting her. I mean, I think that she said more recently that she's realized how buttoned up she is. And my husband and I were like, yes. Yeah. She was like, do you think I'm buttoned? People tell me I'm repressed. And we were like, well. So I think that is an example of how my family thinks you should process emotions. And so anything that I did, by contrast, was dramatic. I wanted a lot of attention as a child. I got certain types of attention and not other types of attention. But I just, I don't know why I have this recurring, I mean, this comes up so much where I'm like, I'm just being, like, I want to know what sort of a standard emotional response to a life event is, and then calibrate my response to that. And that comes up kind of over and over again in the book, where I'm like, well, okay, like I just had brain surgery and I think I still have brain cancer, but everybody around me is acting really relieved. So I should act relieved instead of being like, I wonder how I feel in this moment. I will approach this with a sense of open curiosity and wonder, and like, oh, look, I'm sad, or oh, look, I'm scared. And I've had to really actively cultivate that and get really, really simple with things. And I have there's a woman that I work with really closely who mentors me in a lot of things, and we're both very, very smart, and we have conversations that sound really not that smart because I'll tell her something and she'll say, "Oh, that sounds so sad," or "That sounds really great." And so we have to simplify things because otherwise I just can't access it because I'm so afraid that I'm doing it incorrectly or I'm doing something wrong or some punishment is on its way and I don't know where it's coming from, but it'll definitely find me and I have to behave well. And I feel like this is not quite answering your question. I feel like I'm not correctly answering the question about doing things correctly. So
it's a good feeling. When you bring up you and the mentor, it reminds me of the best part of Frasier, which was Frasier and Niles, when they would be lowbrow. When the two brothers would just make some lowbrow dumb joke, and to them it was great because they didn't have to be the two smart guys who were dominating every conversation. Just when they were by themselves, they could be,
Yep.
Which is me and my brother in some respects.
Oh, I'm glad you have that.
Yeah. Usually about basketball, but occasionally other topics.
Yeah.
Living on social media.
Yeah.
It's a chunk of the book. I bring it up because I blew up my account on Facebook about 3 weeks ago, and they're still giving you have 1 more week to restore it. I've asked them how much they would pay me to come back on, and they haven't responded to that. So,
what was your impetus for?
Well, it's a lengthy and rambling tale. December 2016, lost my dog died, and grieving, lots of, condolences from people a month after the election. And I just had this sense that, contra some of what you write in the book, that as kind as those well wishes were and those condolences were, they weren't real. And the experiences that, the bond between me and my dog, with my wife and our little family setup, was something that is not transferable, is not distributable across a virtual network like that. And so from there on, between that and the election craziness, I stopped reading anyone else's stuff. I stopped reading the feed. I just used Facebook to promote the podcast. And I no longer shared, commented, or anything. And that went on over a year plus, and I realized I am not missing anything here. And I can make connections with people, pitch them on the show, but I would never, just hit like buttons or anything. I started using Instagram, posting pictures and having relatively oblique comments and having those cross-post to Facebook, usually not in real time, so that even if somebody thought I was in City X, I was in City X like a week earlier, which helped prove the point that this isn't real. This is just a simulacra of being human. And then with the George Soros stuff and everything else, I had if you're going to make all this money off me and use it to perpetuate, anti-Semitic tropes when you need to, I'm just going to bail on this. So, so I zapped that, deactivated it for a month, realized I'm not really missing anything, deleted it a month later, kept Instagram for the moment. But even that I post less and less too. And, it's that question, I guess. And I don't do one of those, you goddamn kids, get off my lawn generational thing. Because I know people older than me for whom, having the network of friends, et cetera, through that works really well. In some respects, for me, the podcast network, the mind map of all the guests and where they come from, is my substitute for Facebook. I can reach out now to people. I can hit up, the important people who I've stayed in touch with over the years. And there's a qualifier, which is that we spent an hour or two looking at each other across a table.
Right.
And on Facebook, you don't necessarily have that. There's somebody from my grad school who was mad when I first said I was not reading the feed anymore and basically just using it for the podcast, because she felt, this is a great bonding thing and a great way for people to connect and all that. And I never had the heart to tell her, I don't remember her from grad school. We were connected on Facebook and had this nice, well, probably not. We had this nice connection on Facebook for a couple of years, but I enjoyed the stuff she wrote about, but I could not remember meeting her back in Annapolis in the early 90s. Go figure.
Yeah.
But, so yeah, in that respect, the virtualness of it, and now all the slimy business stuff behind it all, I just had to, if I don't need it. It's the same reason, and this will sound funny because I'm high and low at the same time. Same reason I quit watching pro wrestling many, many years ago.
Okay.
Because Chris Benoit, this good character wrestler, as a person apparently, good character, went nuts, killed his wife, killed his son, and wandered around the house for 2 days before hanging himself. And that was these guys are taking all these shots to the head and having psychotic breakdowns. I'm not going to endorse this by watching this programming and contributing. Same reason I quit watching football a couple of years ago.
Right.
So, but if they pay me to come back, I guess, I'd have to weigh how much that stuff is worth. But cheap Jew that I am. But anyway, that's the rationale I had for getting off of the network. But reading your book, it speaks specifically against that in some respects, in the way you experienced it and what friendship meant to you while you were going, especially while you were going through some of the health episodes you had.
Yeah.
So tell me, should I come back on or should I wait until I get a brain tumor? That's
Yeah, I mean, I'd wait until you get a brain tumor. I actually recently, I did a Twitter poll, can I get off Facebook? And, I think the question was like, is it the worst thing in the world to get off Facebook, 2 months before my book comes out? And half of the people said yes and half the people said no. So I said, do I have enemies voting against my interest here?
Anytime you can doubt yourself is a good day.
Exactly. You're starting to pick it up. I mean, when I was sick, when I first got sick, I didn't know how sick I was going to get. Sure. Right. And so I think that part of what I experienced on Facebook was the first time I was in the emergency room. I was like, what a funny thing. I'm in the emergency room. And, I realize now there's a lot of people who are sick. There's sort of a whole conversation of especially younger women who are sick. But, I kind of got sick before people were talking about it that much. I mean, or maybe they were and I just wasn't aware of it. But I felt like it was very unusual that I was in the hospital so frequently. So I remember taking my first ER selfie and being, I'd never been in the emergency room before, and I was 30, and thinking like, haha, this is funny, I'm going to post it to Facebook. And then I was on this bike ride, and I got really, really sick, and I had to leave. And a lot of people had given me money to do the bike ride. It was the AIDS life cycle. So I felt like I should explain to them, why I wasn't doing the ride anymore. And I just thought, okay, this is nice. I'm just going to sort of update people who've given me money. And then more things started happening. And I think Facebook had just introduced checking in as something you could do. So I just sort of followed the technology. And I was like, I'm just going to check in at UCSF, whatever. And then I just kept checking in more and more and more and posting more and more updates. And then when I was actually hospitalized for, what we learned later was this hemorrhage. I was really out of it. And I was also in this relationship with somebody who was really trying to get out. We were both trying to get out of the relationship, but we couldn't. So we were sort of like thrown together in this hospital room, but we didn't really want to talk to each other. And I wanted comfort, and I wasn't getting it from them. And so I was like, I have a lot of hours. I have my phone. I'm just going to go on Facebook and be like, I'm still in the hospital. And people started responding. And then I was like, oh, this is so nice. Like maybe, also it's something that my first draft was like 95 pages of relationship drama, which my editor cut down into 2 paragraphs.
I was going to say, you managed to, despite talking about your horrendous, as you put it, behavior over the years, you managed not to dwell on it. I see now.
I tried to dwell on it, believe me. Oh, yeah, I know. She was great. Helen Atzmat, Houghton Mifflin, was amazing. She was like, strong pages, Eva. Let's
You'll lose all reader support here.
Oh, God, 100%. But that's actually, that's an issue of distance, which is that when I wrote those 100 pages, I was still really torn up about this relationship. And now I can look back on it. So we're trying to break up. We couldn't break up. I felt really lonely. I felt really isolated. I had sort of isolated myself from a lot of my friends over the course of that relationship. And so in a way, this was me being like, I'm still here, like still be friends with me. And I found social media to be distracting. It was entertaining. And I addressed this, there was this sort of way in which social media and particularly the Facebook timeline indicates some sort of and this was before they started like fucking with the algorithm and like it was, mostly chronological, is my experience was not linear. And I found the limits of what social media can do. And I talk about that where it's like at a certain point, and I think that point changed a lot, I felt like I now had to perform some kind of role, and I felt pressure, which nobody put on me, but I felt.
No, but we do that. That's part of what the platform does to
exactly.
You have to put on a show for people.
Right. And I was like, oh, I'm like grateful for this, but I was like, I'm not grateful for, like, this is garbage. Like, I hate this. And it's funny, a friend of a friend, sort of a friend, went through some medical stuff last year, and she was posting all this stuff, and I was getting really upset about it. And she was saying, like, I'm so grateful to everybody who's helping me, and I'm out of pain. And she was so positive, and I just wanted to like call her and be like, you're wrong. This is terrible. This is really awful. This is bad. You need to know how bad it is. And then she actually messaged me and said, like, I'm really struggling. I'm having a really hard time. And I was like, dude, but your Facebook is like not having a hard time. And we talked about it a little bit. And so, I think that there is I'm not that interested in actually discussing like how people put on a show and things are fake, because I think that actually misses a really deeper opportunity for how we even perform things not being fake. Like the next level of deception for me is not, everything's amazing and my surgery went great, but like everything is terrible and my surgery did not go well, but that's still being performative. And what I found was that social media, right, we have our argument and our counter argument. So argument is social media let people send me messages. It made me feel that people paid attention. It made me feel less alone. It was entertaining. And the counter argument is that it almost forced a narrative cohesion to an experience that I could not see clearly at the time. And I think that I suffered a lot because of that. And I talk about, these late nights with Allison where I'm like, we're sitting in bed next to each other and we're both on our computers and we're looking at our various test results, and we're like, I wanted this is so like mortifying or not, but at a certain point, every time my tumor marker rose, I felt relieved because it led me towards certainty. And the thing that was so painful for me was uncertainty. And I would check my tumor marker, and if it had risen by, 3 points or 6 points, I would be like, okay, great. We're closer to this threshold, after which they just administer systemic chemotherapy, even if they can't find a tumor because they think that the tumor is too small. And part of me was like, I just want to fucking get to that threshold and do systemic chemotherapy and do whole brain radiation and like possibly die, because then at least I'll know what to expect. Whereas this in between is so uncomfortable that it almost feels unsustainable. And that's the kind of thing that I could not share on social media. I couldn't say, Well,
you could, but you'd be Martin Heidegger.
Right.
You'd be writing about uncertainty and thrownness.
Right.
And the existential
right.
thing. Yeah.
And that would have been...
Which nobody wants to see on Facebook.
Right. Or I think, I would have felt comfortable writing about the uncertainty, but I wouldn't have felt comfortable posting a picture of my tumor marker and saying, I'm actually disappointed that it went down because now I have more uncertainty. I felt like... If
you're really hardcore.
Right. Yeah. Right. That would have been amazing, next level. But I also, I just published a piece about debt and...
Which I was going to say, deception and secrecy are
I love them.
Ongoing thread throughout your life. So potentially, your particular approach to Facebook might not be one that, characterizes most other people's.
Yeah. I think I think a lot about performing vulnerability. And again, is this me tricking myself and actually being vulnerable, or is this me not being vulnerable and tricking a few people or tricking everybody? But I wrote this essay about debt, and then a friend of mine and I went for lunch, and I was like, she's unemployed. So I said, listen, I'll get your bagel. And she said, no, I read your essay. You can't afford my bagel. And I said to her, I was like, that essay wasn't my diary.
I can afford the bagel. I can't afford to buy the bagel shop is the problem.
Exactly. Yeah. I was like, come on. But I wanted to put I drafted a tweet in my head today that was, an essay is not a diary, a memoir. But I thought that will get read as an indictment of my own actual memoir at some point. But I think that part of what I do is And again, going back to what I said at the beginning, the sort of dispassionate view of events. I just sort of think, oh, right, there was that time that I did that horrible thing with that dude. That's a really good piece of evidence to, construct my argument about intimacy or secrecy or lying or whatever. So I sort of just look at it and I think, okay, I'm just going to use it. And then, 4 to 6 weeks later, I have a feeling about it. I think of social media as a sort of curtain wall, right? So it's not structural, but it's hung off of the actual structure. And it is performative, but I think that I hope that my approach to its performativity is both more nuanced and more deceptive than, hashtag inspiration, hashtag influencer. I mean, I actually hashtag myself influencer a lot to make fun of myself.
I hashtag sweat like Patrick Ewing.
That's so great. But I'm also aware that the influencer hashtag will get picked up by people searching influencer, So it's sort of, I'm just trying to have fun with this stuff and just sort of play these games and then see what happens. But I think the final sort of analysis is going to be whomst among us was actually deceived by me, and I have a fear that it is me, that I am involved in elaborate self-deception and I sort of dress it up in various forms of art and narrative and rhetoric, but ultimately, I'm actually just here being honest about myself, sort of uncontrollably, and that's just what I'm here to do. But then people are like, wow, that was so honest. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, but probably not. And what I really mean is.
Right. I'm like, oh, that's so sweet that you thought that I was being honest. But
on another level, it's also to enrich Facebook shareholers. That, throwing that additional layer of craziness on top of it. Now, again, for somebody who has a book coming out, stay on.
Right.
It's from all the authors and other artists I've worked with, that is a much bigger driver than Twitter and other media, other platforms.
No, but I wish that I could get it. My politics are not in line with being on it, but I just think it is career suicide at this point, not to quit social media 3 weeks before my book comes out.
But you've committed career suicide in a number of attempts over the years.
That's a good point. I know. Keep trying.
You find another way, but
thanks.
I was going to ask with the money and debt essay, because there's an aspect of the memoir that felt a little like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, not for you being a crazy ex-girlfriend, but just the question of where's the money coming from exactly for, this, that, and the other thing, which comes in and out occasionally, but not with any degree of the specificity and detail that you put into that essay on BuzzFeed, which may or may not be factual, but, also because you drastically changed the numbers on the fly because of an inability to face your crippling debt. So.
Is it crippling? It feels fine.
You don't seem crippled.
Yeah.
I just managed to eke by without ever talking about money. But how difficult? As I posted on Twitter when I retweeted that piece, as Bukowski says, money is more serious than death in America. Was it difficult for you to try to address that?
To write that piece?
Yeah. Or again, did it feel like part of the performance of being Eva?
It wasn't difficult to write. I was very graciously invited to join the Artist's Way by a number of friends, and I said, no, I hate the Artist's Way. It's terrible. I'm never going to do it, And then I realized that I have separated myself from people, It's like...
Did I say that out loud? I'm sorry.
I literally say that out loud to a group of very nice people who are befriending.
Only a moron would do that.
Literally, I'm like, I don't know what kind of idiot needs to use the Artist's Way, but it's not me. And they're like, great, hi, welcome to Brooklyn. So, still have flaws. But then, they post these pictures of, the cheese plate, the Artist's Way, and I'm like, why have I done this to myself, right? I'm an idiot. So, this is getting to your question. So, the reason that I don't like the Artist's Way, or think that I don't like the Artist's Way, is that I never look directly at my work as a creative process. I'm very pragmatic about it. I feel like I'm an accountant, right? I'm an accountant who just puts numbers in a column and I write things. And when I'm writing, I feel more peace than I have ever felt at any other point in my life. I have no relationship to this idea that writing a memoir is going to be, writing honestly about ourselves is going to be draining. I'm in a lot of Facebook groups for people who write and they say like, oh gosh, take a break every hour and, writing about your life. And I'm like, get it together. This is not like, it's just punching the clock. Come on. So when I'm writing, I'm so focused on, does the sentence work? Does the structure work? What, should this be in dialogue? How should I do this? I just think about it as, I'm just an accountant doing my tax forms. And then the piece comes out and then people have responses and then I start feeling weird. So what happened with the debt piece is as I wrote it, I was like, this is a great argument that I'm making. I'm doing a good job here. But then a lot of people started messaging me and saying like, one friend even was like, I can't bring myself to click. I have so much anxiety. And I was like, listen, I think you might feel better. It's not like, here's how to get out of debt. And she said, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. And other friends were like, I'm crying. I can't even talk about my dad. And so I'm getting a lot of emotional input. And of course, all the validation is great. I'm kind of getting high off of it. And I'm like, this is awesome. And that was all on Friday. And then yesterday I woke up riddled with anxiety. I mean, just
more so than usual?
Yeah, I'm normally not like super anxious. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sort of like, as much as like all these things happen and I'm like, I need validation and whatever, like I don't feel day-to-day anxiety. I mostly feel like I'm probably going to do a good job and that person will probably like me. Like I assumed that we would get along. My basic thing is like, we're going to have a great conversation. I don't have anxiety about that. But so it is unusual for me to have a lot of anxiety. And I was just like, God, I'm suffering so acutely. Why am I suffering so much? I was just so uncomfortable. And finally I was like, I have an emotional hangover from having published this piece. But the hangover didn't come from my writing it. It came from needing to sort of do the kind of post game with people, which I didn't need to do, but I chose to do, and having other people have their emotions at me. And after like the 14th person was like, wow, this essay really made me have a lot of feelings. Then I'm like, I wonder if I also have actual feelings about my debt and money. And then I don't want to have any feelings. So I came home on Friday night and just immediately started like eating candy. Clearly I was just like, must immediately eat all my frozen Milk Bar cookies and like 14 bags of Sour Patch Kids Extreme. I just totally lost my train of thought because all those people walked
Emotional
in.
hangover.
Right.
Validation by getting people writing, but then realizing that it's actually destroying you.
Right. So feeling about this debt essay. And I texted my friend Lauren, who takes up a lot of the last third of the book, and I just said, God, all these people are emailing me about their feelings, and she was like, and people are asking me if I'm having feelings, and she said, no, you're going to have those in 4 to 6 weeks. And like, that's what happens. I just have a very, very, very delayed emotional reaction, which is, I think, what lets me do this kind of work. And I want to cultivate it, and that's why I don't want to do the artist way, because I feel like if I start to integrate myself with the way that I produce this work, I won't be able to produce the work anymore because I'll be able to see the actual cost of doing it to myself. And then what person in their right mind would continue to like publicly excavate their deepest shames in service of like,
Sorry, go on.
Like, I don't know what it's in service. And this is why I'm just driven. Like somebody said, how did you get the motivation to write a whole book? And I was like, I don't understand the question. I have to motivate myself to clean up my clothes, but not write that's just the thing I just want to write about my secrets, I guess.
One aspect of the book that only comes out to me in doing the research afterwards was that you had to keep an enormous thing private throughout that, which is a harassment case you were involved in where you were the complainant, not the defendant.
Thank you. I also feel the need to clarify that to people.
I just figured we may as well just make sure it's 100% clear to everyone. But that's the sort of thing that, especially from your descriptions of it, and I have other friends who've gone through that process too, again, as complainants, that can dominate your entire life and, warp the way you're seeing things, much in the way that, both the uncertainty of test results and the eternity of pain can go on. Managing to divorce that part of the story while telling the memoir, how difficult was that for you?
I think that it couldn't have happened any other way. That process was...
It was ongoing and didn't conclude until after the book.
Yeah. So I filed my complaint in 2016. I sold my book after, so I filed the complaint in March and I sold my book in May, which is important because a legal defense was that I had made all of the harassment up to promote my book, which I had not yet sold. So there's actually like a lawyer being like, while I did understand this hypothesis,
nonetheless, time works in one direction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
as we know, women always make this up to become famous because of all those famous women who've been.
Right. And let me tell you, the fame that I get from this is just A+.
Look, you're on the podcast with some schlub from New Jersey now.
Everything I've ever wanted. So I filed in 2016. I thought it would be over by August. I mean, I filed in March and I was like, this will be over by August because there'd been a lot of rhetoric about changes, and it just went on and on and on and on. And it was excruciating. I mean, it was truly, I couldn't talk about it because that would have impacted potential whatevers. One of my best friends, I was talking to him about how frustrated I was that nobody knew what was going on. And he was like, Eva, you can't tell me, because I was like, you could be subpoenaed. Any of my friends could be subpoenaed at any moment. My therapist could be subpoenaed. So I couldn't talk to anybody.
See, my life is a non-disclosure agreement. So, I'm used to that as a mentality. But yes, I can understand how for a normal human being this is difficult.
Yeah,
so,
it was
not to call you normal by any means, but
That's okay. Yes, my perils of an ordinary life. It was awful, and it was so demoralizing, and things that I never expected to happen happened, and what I had imagined would happen, which is that I would speak up, and then the other alleged people who allegedly may or may not have been impacted by the same person would all speak up, and instead everybody was just mad at me for messing with their exam schedules. And then I hired a lawyer and all of that. So it was awful. And this book was the greatest solace. I mean, it just was the place that I could return to and not, I was so absorbed in the writing while I was writing it that whole thing just disappeared.
Was it easy to do that? Knowing that what you were going through with the complaint was, part of your psyche and part of how you were seeing the world, being able to filter that out?
I'm very good at compartmentalizing.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. I was taking creative writing workshops, and I was writing, I didn't workshop stuff that I'd written for the book, but I was doing a series of horror stories for Vikram Chandra, who's this great novelist. Sacred Games is on Netflix now. He wrote it. So I'm learning how to structure, horror in a sort of fictional way. I'm dealing with this horror, which is UC Berkeley. And then I'm writing this book about somebody who is dead. And whom I missed and whose counsel I really wish I could have had. And so I think writing the book, I got to sort of resurrect her in a way and imagine what she might have said about this. And so, compartmentalizing felt like a gift. And my brain is just wired. I have reverse ADD. When I'm concentrating, nothing else matters. I'm unaware of my body. I'm unaware of temperature. I'm undistractable. And that's a gift that I really, really I don't try and cultivate it because, again, I think if I look at it, it'll disappear. But I'm aware of it and I cherish it. Maybe that's a better way of looking at it. And so I had this area of my life where I had to be so careful not to say the wrong thing and get sued. And I felt so constricted and so suppressed. And then I had this book where I had a deadline, but I knew only one person was going to read the draft, and that was my editor, whom I trusted. And so I just had extraordinary freedom. And I think what I wanted in my UC Berkeley case was freedom, and I didn't have any. And so I just went to the page and was like, here's where I can do anything. And so it was such a relief. And it was the only consistent tether to reality or to the rest of the world. It was just the book became my private friend, and I would read it to myself every night to get a sense of the structure and the pacing. And sometimes I'd read it out loud and sometimes I'd read it to myself. So my husband would come in and I'd be sitting there. I would email it to myself in different formats, to just try and have it be unfamiliar. And I'd be sitting there hunched in the dark, whispering sentences to myself. But it just became...
He's like, brain tumor? No brain tumor.
Yeah, I know. We're always like, is it back, Eva? But it became a world that I could live in. this book, it started to feel like it was a structure that I could start to inhabit. And so it was a retreat. And I thought about writing about my UC Berkeley experiences. And I even workshopped the beginnings of a book proposal. And my professor said, what is the phrase? Revenge is a dish best served cold. He was like, Eva, you need to wait like 10 years before you can. And now I don't think that I need to revisit that at all. But it was, I mean, people have pointed out that I do a lot of things. I just have a lot of different careers at the same time. And I think a question was like, how did you write a book and a dissertation and do this legal case at the same time? And it's like, because I couldn't have done any of them without the balance of the other.
As I like to say, there's nothing I can't half-ass.
Oh my God. But I whole-assed all of them.
I know.
That's
I don't want to denigrate your work.
Yeah. I'll
just denigrate my own. Tell me about the dissertation, the Saarinen's architectural publicity machine.
Yeah. So
Dish.
Aline Bernstein Luchheim Saarinen, wife of Eero Saarinen, noted Finnish-American mid-century architect, was the associate art critic for the New York Times in 1953. Got an assignment to write about Eero Saarinen, who was like just emerging from the shadow of his father, Eliel. Flew to Bloomfield Hills, got in the car with him. They turned a corner physically and emotionally, held hands in the car, had a wild night, and the rest.
Finns are wont to do.
as apparently, so I did actually have to cut I had a lot of pretty salacious material in the dissertation, and I cut all that out. But she wrote about him. They had an affair. They fell in love. He was married. She was engaged. But there's this incredible archive of letters where they are working out through letters what they're going to be to each other personally and professionally. And so I was writing this book about love, and I was also reading these letters where they are almost writing their relationship into being through this sort of epistolary form. Not a sort of epistolary form. It was through an epistolary form. And then she very slowly and precisely begins to codify this professional role, which is now an architectural publicist, which is a job that many people have. At the time, there was nobody whose actual job was to liaise between architecture firms and magazines. So firms would just send pictures to magazines, and the magazines were like, this seems great or this seems not great, we'll publish it. So there's these letters where she starts to say, I think I can help you work out through talk, what your ideas are. So on a historical level, I'm reinserting her into the history of his life, but also I'm arguing for exactly when this role that is now ubiquitous was professionalized, and it was with her. And then on a theoretical level, I'm exploring the relationship between image and text and arguing for text being iterative as opposed to representative, right? So a lot of architects think that the building is a coherent, legible object, and a writer can add writing, but the writing is sort of additional. And my argument is that language and architecture are, in fact, much more closely linked, and that the role of the critic can be creative as well as, it's not a Xerox. It's, they're not like, well, I'm just translating the form of the building into language. They're actually adding something to our understanding of the building by introducing language. And that theoretical framework was not hugely articulated in the dissertation because it's like very hard to. I was going to say, when you start getting
into the Derrida.
Yes, I did read a little Derrida for my dissertation, but I mean, really, I wanted to make an argument that language is important to architecture, and that Aline Luchheim Saarinen was important to Saarinen's career and to the way in which architectural history is produced. And the intervention that my parents have said is important is in its critique, which was very intended, of the way in which most architectural historians do history, which is to rely on magazines as almost neutral archives, right? So they'll say, oh, well, this architect was famous because they were in this magazine. And I'm like, well, they were in that magazine because of this extra agent who has been entirely overlooked in history. So yeah, I finished in December and have a PhD. It's pretty wild.
Dr. Hagberg Fisher.
Dr. Hagberg Fisher.
Go figure. Yeah. We're not in Germany, because in Germany you're not allowed to use PhD for doctor, apparently.
Oh, you're not?
I think that was the case, that they concluded that it's verboten.
I should know that.
Yeah, you're not going to travel to Germany for speaking engagements, are you?
I mean, probably.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotta, so if you call yourself Dr. Fisher, there might be an instance where, they think there's an emergency and
right.
you can, give somebody a tracheotomy, which is entirely possible you could. That's the great thing. So,
well, thanks.
One question that's been plaguing me since I started the book, do you have your web browser set up to block WebMD, or do you actually?
God. No.
You should really think about that. Get freedom.to, just install that and that
I have Freedom. I have blocked Amazon, Goodreads, and NetGalley.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Afraid of reading your own reviews or just buying other people's? Okay.
No, I want to buy other people's books, not on Amazon.
I can't. Yeah. So.
No, I can't. I can't read mean reviews about my work. It makes me so sad.
Oh, thank God. I mean, I didn't say anything about the book.
Oh, fuck. Come on. This is an
Have you heard
trick.
any response? Anytime I can make you doubt yourself, again, it's a worthwhile day. Are you getting any response or reception so far? I know it's coming out in a few weeks, but has there been?
There's been some.
There are a few blurbs that they included with the press material.
There's more blurbs have come in. I got a great. It's on a couple most anticipated lists, and what happened recently? The Kirkus review was great. There's a Publisher's Weekly review. It was a starred Publisher's Weekly review.
Are you okay with professional reviews versus fear of amateur reviews? Yeah.
I actually told my publisher, I said, don't send me any reviews at all. So they were sending me reviews, and then I was it was like doing a little bit of cocaine, which I can't do.
I literally have no idea. And I'll tell you, it's because I'm 10 years older than you, and I was about 14, 15 years old when Len Bias died. I don't know if you know who. Amazing college basketball player. Because of a trade, the Celtics were able to draft him at the number 2 spot. They were going to solidify their post-Larry Bird future.
Right.
He celebrated with coke, had a heart attack that night, and died. Basically, as like a 15-year-old, that was my fuck it. I will be the one other guy who apparently.
So you've never done cocaine?
Nope, never.
Have you done other drugs?
Yeah, but I tend not to talk about it on mic because of my day job. But again, still not a whole lot. I'm really almost straight edge. I've also been, because of my urologist as opposed to everything you went through, clean, no booze for 6 or 7 years now.
Cool.
My post-addict guests tend to get freaked out by that solely because I just said, I guess I'm not going to drink again, and just never drank again.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
That really bothers you guys.
I know.
You didn't agonize. You didn't fight.
No, I'm more just like, if you don't have I guess if you have a good reason, I can understand it. But
Well, he said booze, caffeine, and spicy food. My wife's Cajun. I live on coffee, so I thought, let me see what happens if I stop drinking.
Yeah.
No symptoms, and I've just never, sorry.
That's amazing. No, I just always say, I borrowed this line from a mutual friend of ours, which was like, if I weren't an alcoholic, I'd be drunk all the time. I just think I see normal people who aren't alcoholics, and they're like, no thanks, I'm good with one glass. I'm like, no, but you can do all the drugs. Why aren't you doing all the drugs? And they're like,
totally, you should.
Because I don't need to.
Did you have, you bring it up a little bit, but did you have issues with, opioids related to the surgery and fear of that re-triggering?
Yeah.
I had a friend who had just ovarian surgery a few years ago, and that was her, I can't have anything that's going to be an issue.
Yeah.
And you sort of allude to that.
I do, yeah. So I'd been told, I hadn't been told anything, but I'd heard all these horror stories, about people who, I think you had a question before this. What was your question before? We were going somewhere.
Getting high.
I'll answer this one.
Go on. Yeah. Something about cocaine and reviews, but.
Right. Oh yeah, that I ask people not to send me reviews because it's like a little bit of cocaine where I just want more, and then it's not enough, and then it's bad, and then I feel bad and all that. So I don't read my own reviews. So opioids, I was really, really, really terrified. I had heard these stories about people who had, a long time sober, and then they had surgery and they took pills and then they relapsed and then they died. And so, the morning after brain surgery, when I was still, very well treated they came in like every couple hours and gave me, a lot of OxyContin, and I was like, I have no pain. And I was also on extremely large amounts of steroids. So I remember waking up and being like, this is great. I feel fine. Like, I'm just going to go home. And the nurse said, here's a prescription for Norco. You should take this. And I said, no, I don't, I was very proud of this, but I was like, I don't take opioids. And she said, great. I'm just going to give you the prescription anyway.
I'm going to sneak it into your purse here. And
just give it to your mom. So I go home and, you know, I'm fine and I'm doing great and I lie down and like, and also, I mean, I have to like the power of trauma, you know, I mean, I was so profoundly traumatized that I just had so much adrenaline and so much confusion. I mean, it's like I go to get this brain surgery and I wake up and I have literally like a chunk of my brain has been taken out. Like a square inch of brain is gone. And it's so scary. And I think that adrenaline really kind of kept me going. I get home and I get in bed and I'm really confused. And I also accepted a work assignment that day, which is like, you know, so much compassion for myself. And then I started experiencing pain. And I describe this in the book, but it's like, I could not have imagined that level of physical pain. Have you experienced excruciating pain in your life?
Knee blowout, surgery around that.
That sounds bad.
You know, nothing, infection that, you know, for a day or so just felt like I was, you know, going to die. But,
yeah. Right.
But then it goes away after a day or so.
Right. So pain that makes you think you're going to die. I mean, so I just had not, in my hubris, I just thought pain is, you know, pain is controllable, right? If you just think about it or meditate or whatever. And I was so desperate. I mean, I remember thinking like, oh, this is why people do heroin. And if somebody gave me heroin.
There are other reasons why people do heroin, but anyway, go.
So, you know. And I just thought like, you know, I've been sober for almost 6 years. And if somebody gave me heroin right now, I would do it. Because the pain was so bad. So I sent my mother to the pharmacy and then I took opioids. And then because of my catching the pain too late, you know, I had to take stronger pain medicine. So I was very much like, I'm going to take it as prescribed, you know, every 4 hours. Like I had this whole row of pill bottles of like various different types of medicines. And I was like taking everything and really rigorously documenting it. And my pain was controlled. And then I reached a day and I didn't have any pain. And so I like flushed all of my remaining Percocet down the toilet. And my stepfather was with me at the time and he was like, this doesn't seem like a great idea. And I was like, I'm an addict. I have no business having pills. And of course, what I didn't realize was that I had a momentary reprieve of pain and the pain returned. And I went to the emergency room and they were like, you know, to break this pain, we should probably give you morphine. And I was sobbing and I just said, I can't have morphine. You can't give me morphine. And I refused it. And then they gave me more oxycodone. And then I basically, you know, I was humbled by that experience. And, you know, I think that a thread in my book is that I never learn the lessons that I want to learn. You know, I'm like so ready to learn the lesson about being tough. And I learned a lesson about being not tough. And it was like that with pain medicine, where I thought that the lesson I was going to learn was about how I'm stronger than opioids, or, you know, my sobriety is perfect because I only take them every 4 hours and whatever. And what I've had to learn to do over time, because I continue to have chronic pain because I had not adequately treated it in the beginning, was I had to learn to take opioids like as needed. And, you know, as an alcoholic, like I need to be in oblivion all the time. Somebody today talked about having a nervous breakdown and I was like, oh, I'd love to have a nervous breakdown, right? I want to be, I fantasize about being in traction in a hospital for like 6 months, you know, being in a rehab where I don't have to do any, I mean, I just want, Otessa Moshfegh wrote this amazing book, My Year of Rest and Relaxation, about somebody who like sleeps for a year. I was like, I get it, man. You know, and at the same time, of course, I have this wild, insatiable drive to be in the world and productive. And I'm a Leo rising, ultimate Leo, type 3. Like, you know, obviously I was in the hospital and didn't want to be in it. So this is a weird fantasy. But what I had to learn about opioids was that my attempts at controlling actually led to more suffering. And I had to learn to ask for help in ways that are deeply uncomfortable. And so I still now very occasionally have to take pain medicine for endometriosis, and the endometriosis got worse the last couple months, and my doctor prescribed me opioids. And, you know, somebody who helps me stay sober, I was talking to her, and she was like, you know, most people get to put the tiger in the cage, and like the trick is you leave the tiger in the cage, right? We don't drink anymore, right? I don't pick up a beer because Maybe one is fine, but it's the seventh. But she said, you have to take the tiger out of the cage when you think it's appropriate. And I can't do that by myself. And so what I've learned to do is I ask somebody every single time before I take something. I check in with somebody and I'm like, hey, I've had really, really bad pain. I took Motrin. It didn't work. I'm going to take something stronger. And they're like, great. Okay. I have a lot of shame about that. I remember when I first got sober, I really wanted the sort of purity of being able to say, like, I haven't had any mind-altering chemical in my body for 1 year. I've been sober like 11 and a half years now, and I've had a lot of drugs go through my system. A lot. And it's surrendering to that reality that is so hard for my ego, and it's scary. And I often will do like a very quick round of, I'll just sort of write out, what am I afraid of with taking this medicine, or what am I worried about? And it's always that I'm going to be kicked out, or somebody else will say like I'll get kicked out of my like support as being meetings. Sober? Yeah. Or like, oh, well, you're not really. And I think I share this experience when I think it might be directly helpful, because I think that there are so many people who are sober who say like, I broke my finger, but my sobriety is more important. I'm not going to take Vicodin. And I always say, that was my attitude. And then I experienced really severe pain. And so that's no longer my attitude, and this is my experience. But I still feel often that, I often feel that I have created pain so that I can take a painkiller. I'll think like,
is it really this bad?
Yeah.
Am I doing this because
would somebody else have this pain and just get a water bottle? And that's why, again, right, it's this theme of intimacy, is I on my own can't live. I can't do it. But I have friends, so I'll text my friends and I'll say like, hey, can you remind me? And one of my friends is great. She's been sober for 1,000,000 years. She says, Eva, every single person that I know who has endometriosis needs to take opioids, when they're bleeding. And I'm like, okay. But I still sometimes think like, well,
but I'm
again, I'm just being dramatic, or I'm exaggerating. And I had a thought that was really important. Oh no, yeah, this was a thought. So sometimes when I don't have pain, I will feel overwhelmed by life, and I have these fantasies about being in traction or being in a rehab or having a nervous breakdown. And in that moment I think, ooh, I can't wait until I get to take another painkiller, right? Like that's going to be great. I'm finally going to get that oblivion I've been chasing. And invariably, a couple of weeks later, I will have pain. And when I actually have pain, all I want is not to be in pain anymore. And I used to not take a painkiller if I had had a thought, right? So if I recalled having a thought like 2 weeks earlier, I would think, well, I don't, I had that bad thought. I would moralize it as I had a bad thought. And so I need to suffer to stay correct, with whatever, like.
Yeah, the good place.
Whoever's monitoring, right, the good place. And the lesson that I didn't want to learn, but that I did, was that like I didn't get sober to suffer, and I didn't get sober to be a martyr. And that if I hold myself accountable to every thought that I have, somebody said to me once, like, we can't be prosecuted for our thoughts. We all have terrible thoughts all the time. And so I have to be compassionate with myself. And that's really hard for me. And so recently, I had this surgery and I had more pain than anticipated. And I was so mad at my uterus, and I was yelling at it basically, and I finally did this sort of like witchy healing with a friend of mine, and she was like, what is your uterus telling you? And I was like, oh, it hurts so much. It was so violently treated by the surgeon's scalpel. It just wants me to be nice to it, Yeah. And I just put my hand on it, and I was like, I should take the medicine that I have that will help my uterus not hurt. But I've needed years and years and years of like help to get there, to get to that point. And to always, always check my intentions, always check my motives, always check in with somebody else. I talk to my husband a lot. He's really, and I'm very careful not to put him in a position where, he could be culpable for anything, but I'll just say to him like, hey, I have a really, really bad pain right now. And he's like, Eva, I've seen you wait too long and get into worse pain and have to go to the ER. And like, let's not go to the emergency room tonight.
I don't want to spend 12 hours waiting there
right,
for you.
Exactly, right, because he will. And he's just like, I will go with you, but it's sort of it's a hassle. But I mean, this is really like, it's funny that you picked up on this and asked me about this, because this is sort of like the next level surrender practice for me and the next level of like non-attachment. And it's one that
But it's not non-attachment. If anything, it's a greater attachment to the body, to understanding what the body's trying to tell you. But again, I'm saying all this stuff theoretically because, I've led a blessed life where I haven't had to deal with this stuff.
Well, your thing will come for you.
Oh, I know. I'm expecting it all to come crashing down any day, which is how I spent 15 years in the workplace before I quit and launched my own thing. I expected to be fired the next day. Pretty much for
15 years.
Yeah. I kept myself in that state of mind because that was how my anxiety worked.
Right. So that's your thing. When I say your thing will come, it doesn't need to be like the medical thing, but it's like everybody has a thing that
Walter
is really
Kern and I
helpful.
had this conversation once, another guy who's clean.
He is?
Oh, yeah. He's been sober for a couple of decades now.
Fascinating.
And he just, when I kind of explained that situation with the just quitting on my own, he said, you just haven't found your drug yet. And I realized on the drive home that day that I had found my drug, and my drug is anxiety. And it seemed to be working pretty well for me up to that point, so I was just going to keep riding that as far as it could go.
So how is it now with your stable, cushy job?
Well, it's funny. It's not the stable and cushy thing. It's the fact that I don't have coworkers. I don't exist in a world with other people immediately at hand. So that creates a different dynamic. Yeah. And in fact, alleviated a lot of psychological issues I'd had over the decades that I didn't realize the extent of until there was an absence of any other figure for me to relate to. And I thought, oh, that's the horrible behavior I engaged in all these years. I'm not doing that now because there's no one around. Now I can correct for that when it starts to occur around people. Go Gil.
That's amazing.
I will say the only drug that I've been tempted by, which I've talked about on the show before, New Vigil, the non-amphetamine wakefulness drug.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was traveling to China once, and it was my first time there. I was asking all these other pharma people, like, what do you do? It's a 12-hour time difference. How do you deal? Right. And one of the guys said, at the time, Provigil, but New Vigil had just come out. You take that, you'll be able to stay awake the whole first day, then you'll be on regular sleep schedule and you'll be fine. I tested it a week before going to China because I didn't want to have an adverse reaction. 8,000 miles from home, surrounded by people who don't speak English. Yeah. And I had it, gave myself a deliberately bad night's sleep, took it the next morning, and I had this every June at that point with the magazine. I had this project that had to be done based on the calendar. These profiles had to be written every day. And I had one set for Saturday. Problem was, by about 11:30 Saturday morning, I'd finished 3 of them and thought, Oh, I get it. Okay, this is going to make me hyper productive, super aware, and completely awake for 12 to 14 hours. If there was anything that I had a temptation to be addicted to, it would be this. Yeah. Therefore, only take it on either red-eye flights to Europe, where I land at 7:30 or 8 in the morning and want to stay awake until 10 o'clock that night, or some of my crazy down to FDA and back trips where I have to leave the house at 4:30 in the morning and drive home at 8:30 at night. Around the time I hit Baltimore on the train, I would take one and be able to drive home the next day or that evening. But yes, I was perfectly aware that, this is the thing I would have a problem with. Therefore, I shouldn't.
Totally. I mean, that's what I thought about cocaine. I remember like when I started doing Adderall for fun in college, I was very slow to open that door.
See, that's a generational thing because I'm, like I say, only 10 years older, but it wasn't a thing for people my age. It was just that next cusp.
Exactly. So my friends were like snorting Adderall and I was like, you're bad and do drugs, but I'll like take an Adderall. And I remember writing a paper for a class I hadn't been to. Writing like an 8-page paper in 20 minutes and being like, this is amazing. And then I started snorting Adderall. And then I remember thinking like, I shouldn't try cocaine because I am really going to like it. But then, of course, I changed my mind. But your description
I can win this.
Yeah. I mean, New Vigil sounds great.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
When I had to get a prescription of it, I was at my CVS, and they said, well, it doesn't look like your prescription plan covers it. I said, well, how much is it? She goes, oh my God. She turned the screen to me. She's like, it's $22 a pill. I'm like, that's perfectly fine. She goes, what does it do? I said, it does awesome is what it does. Just let it go. I will pay you cash if I need to. Just give me this. But the funny thing was to me, because prior to that, I never understood the whole meth thing. I never got the why it was the biggest thing in the world in the most boring places in the country. You know, why places where there's nothing to do. The last thing I'd want to do is be awake for 48 hours. If anything, barbiturates would make more sense if I was in bumfuck Nebraska. And then I took a Nuvigil and realized, oh, there's a euphoric thing here too. I didn't get it. Now I understand why you run into a pharmacy with 2 guns, kill everybody, and take it. Now it makes sense. Again, I'm never going to take this outside of controlled situations.
Exactly.
But again, I lead a incredibly, controlled and rational life as far as any of you people are concerned. Well, I spend my weekend doing crazy irrational shit like this.
Exactly.
So working on a sequel? You mentioned pitching a book about
my dissertation.
That, but,
Oh, yeah, no, that I'm definitely not writing about. I want my next book to be...
A novel about the Saarinen?
I have a couple ideas. I should turn my dissertation into a book. I embargoed it for 2 years so that I can pitch it. But I applied to a couple academic jobs with great confidence saying, I am currently working on my monograph version of my dissertation, right? Which is like the very boring, peer-reviewed, hyper-footnoted kind of thing, which I can do. It's a mode of performance. I might try and write it as a trade book. I have been working on thinking about like a horror novel, which is weird because I don't read horror novels or watch horror movies. But
I've got a great horror editor in Manhattan I can connect you with. Yeah, she's a past guest of mine.
Okay, that'd be amazing. Because what I sort of want to do is, I don't know if I should even say this, but I will. So I feel like my memoir, did you watch Stranger Things?
No, I lived through it. So, role-playing geek in the 80s. So
there's a
really,
basic...
Don't need to see that again.
That's amazing. You're like, oh, this documentary? Oh, thank you. So Stranger Things, right? There's the world and there's the upside down, which is the sort of like fucked up version of the world. I feel like my memoir is the non-upside down of my experiences, where it's like, it's all the parts, it's all the beautiful parts. And at the same time, there's this, and a review recently called my writing gruesome, which I thought was great. I feel like there is an undercurrent of like extraordinary horror, that I emotionally experienced that I don't think is right to represent in memoir, but that I think is really ready for fiction, for a fictional representation. So I have a short story that I wrote about...
the thread that came out of your nose that was part of the skull
I didn't
recovery
think that
you
was...
thought it pulled and it kind of unfolds and turns you into another person?
God, that'd be amazing.
Wouldn't it?
I should do that, yeah.
But
I wrote this short story that was just about this couple, and they have a baby, and like something is really fucking off with the baby. And then I had all these other ideas about how to fictionalize these experiences, but I just thought like it needs, The Leftovers. Have you seen The Leftovers on HBO?
No, my brother's been kicking my ass about that. God. I know I need to.
The best show. But there was an interview with Tom Perrotta, who'd written the book on which the first season was based, and he said that, he just wanted to apply, maybe it was with the showrunners, either way. Somebody was applying supernatural pressure to make sort of real world points. I feel a drive to do that as well. So that's sort of one. So there's a dissertation, there's this like weird horror novel. And then the other thing that I really want to do is a heavily reported book about the architecture world. I don't want my next book to be a memoir. I don't want it to be about myself. I've been reporting a lot lately and just like love doing it and love being kind of a blank canvas for other people. I love reporting with people who have no idea that I do anything besides just full-time report on the architecture world. I find great peace doing that. So I have a couple ideas kicking around for that. But I'm really devastated not to be working on a book right now because I filed my dissertation and I have this sort of like total void in my life of thinking about a huge project. So I want one, but I don't have an idea that needs to be done yet, and I know that if I try and force it, it won't work, so I'm just waiting.
Plus, book publicity. You need to do that.
Well, but everybody says you should write a book while you're doing book publicity, so you don't get like totally strung out. But
first time out for this sort of book, you really need to devote your energy to that.
I have to write all these essays, and there's a lot. There's a lot to do. And thankfully I do have this like little gig reporting for Architect Magazine where I'm just like, oh, the new museum is unionizing. Great. So I did an interview about that this morning where I interviewed somebody else, which was such a relief. So
did it go as well as this? I hope it would be better, frankly, but
what? This is great. Come on.
Again, I just figured
I know, just like a little neg. No, it's good. My publisher sort of negged me a little bit on Twitter. They were like, we kind of love this book. I was like,
I guess we have to publish it.
I know. So I was like, are you negging me? Because it's working. I love you. So yeah, I hope that this is the first book of many. I mean, this did not feel to me like, a story that I had to tell and now I told it. It was like, I've wanted to write a book since I was 4. I've thought about various types of books. This is the one that I sold. I got to say a lot of things that I wanted to say, but I have so many other things that I want to say. And hopefully this can be the first of many.
Well, I'll get you back on the show.
That would be amazing for my like random book about 1950s American architecture.
That's exactly the shit that's up my alley. That's no, the problem.
Actually, no.
Yeah, see, that's the great thing is that like the great moment I explain to people, and we'll end the show after this, I promise. So you actually have some of Sunday afternoon to yourself. Was when I met a guy named David Leopold, who was Al Hirschfeld's former archivist, and I was in a low point when David and I got together. I'd been doing a couple of bad interviews in a row. The show just didn't work great for me. Didn't feel good. I had a lot of pressure at work. Was thinking about shutting this whole thing down. Remembered David, connected with him, drove out to Bucks County to record with him. And we hit it off. Wonderful conversation. Great time. We finish up and he's like, you know who you got to record with? My friend Ben. He's a silent movie accompanist. And I thought, how the fuck do you know me that well after 2 hours? That's exactly who I want to sit down with. And I was not being facetious in the slightest. That's what was great. And that conversation turned out to be a wonder also.
That's perfect.
So yes, when you have that book on 1950s architecture, I'll be all over that shit.
Great. Cool. Excellent.
Eva, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
And that was Eva Hagberg Fisher. Her brand new book is How to Be Loved, a memoir of life-saving friendship from Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. You can check out Eva's site at evahagbergfisher.com, where you'll find links to the book and a bunch of her other writing, including the architectural stuff and that essay about debt that we talked about. That's a pretty good one. So to spell it out, that is EVAHAGBERGFISHER.com. Eva Hagberg Fisher. She's on Twitter as Eva Hagberg, all one word, and on Instagram as Eva Hagberg Fisher, also all one word. She says she's going to blather on and on about the podcast on Instagram, so check out her feed and her stories there. And check out How to Be Loved. Now, after we wrapped, I asked Eva, so, who you reading? If you want to hear her answer to that and get some extra conversation, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. I just posted the 4th quarter episode from 2018 featuring book recommendations and lots of extra conversation with Eddie Campbell, Nora Krug, Jason Lutz, Summer Pierre, David Small, Mark Derry, Michael Gerber, Angela Himsel, Kathy B. Graham, Shahar Pinsker, and Bill Cardilopoulos. You can support the Virtual Memories Show via patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that podcast, patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, my secret project, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, I recorded this episode at Eva's apartment building in Brooklyn in a workspace there after recording with Deborah Feingold in Manhattan for last week's episode. So all around, there was a George Washington Bridge toll, parking down by Deborah, street parking near Eva, so that helped, but Triborough toll on the way back. So overall, the episodes cost about $55-$60 plus gas and time. If you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories Show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, coffee, or just toss me some money because you think the show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. A special thanks go out to Nick Bartosik, Michael Hacker, Michael Janizik, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Jack Lescamella, Teresa Lewis, Stephen Nadler, Jim Ottaviani, Payne Prophet, Dmitry Samarov, Stephen Solomon, Craig P. Steffen, Greg Tanner, Ford Thomas, and Garrett Zecker for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories show. We have the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Now, our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You can check out my episode with Hal from summer of 2018 and listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth, and that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with legendary cartoonist Mort Gerberg. They can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, go on social media, and go to iTunes. Look up the Virtual Memories Show and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It'll all help us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.